Good morning, everyone. I'm your host, Suchi, and welcome to AI Minute Mondays. Today, we are going to talk about an age old debate in software engineering that now has a new take: the buy versus build debate. Is it better to go ahead and buy a ready made off the shelf product, or should you go ahead and custom build your own solution? Now, in the past, the trade offs were extremely simple: speed versus control, cost versus customization. But with AI in the mix and the way it has accelerated the development life cycles and made it far easier for us to go ahead and build our own solutions, this debate has got a lot more complex. And it's very hard for organizations to figure out what's the right decision for them. So, joining me today to help unpack this topic is Tom Wisnowski, who is the founder of NexEra Digital. Tom, thank you so much for joining us once again on the show. And for the sake of our new viewers, if you can share a little bit about your journey, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to be on the show and love the conversations and a big fan. So my background, so everybody's aware, I've been in industry now for about a little over 30 years. Played many roles over those years. I've been in consulting, helping large and small organizations alike implement infrastructure and custom solutions. I spent a good amount of my career at Microsoft building solutions. And now recently I've started the company NexEra, where we help organizations figure out this new era of intelligent business and how to navigate that.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for sharing that information. So, you've been working with a lot of customers and helping them with their AI transformation journey. And also, based on your experience with how you're seeing AI accelerate the development cycles, what is your take on this buy versus build debate? And what do you think organizations need to think about in terms of the trade offs when they're making this decision about should we go ahead and buy this ready made app, or should we go ahead and build our own custom solution?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And it's a question that we get all the time. And you're absolutely right. So as we're now entering this new phase of what agentic engineering really means and what it's doing to accelerate this industry as far as like software development, product development, and accelerating all industries, it's definitely, I would say shifted the pendulum a bit in how you think about buy versus build. But fundamentally, I think, first of all, I think there's some very extreme sides of this conversation where some are even saying, oh, all SaaS software is dead. Everything will be completely generated. I don't come from that camp. I truly believe that, what will happen is because of agentic engineering, SaaS platforms will become even that much more important and higher quality and more feature rich. And so I do think that there's plenty of reasons why you might want to consider buying versus building. And the way I like to couch this is, the actual, conversation around buy versus build, years ago, if you were to go, let's say 5+ years ago, before we really started heavily investing in, agentic engineering and generating some of the solutions, you would have to evaluate probably the biggest rock in the conversation, which would be the time to market and the true total cost at the minimum, the engineering cost of building custom software. Custom software has traditionally never been that easy. It's been costly. It takes time to build. It takes expertise in-house to do that. And even with some of the low-code options that have come across over the years, that was just pretty much fundamentally true. So what you found was that the option to even consider going custom really wasn't on the table for many. So today that's changed, right? Today you can definitely say that that aspect of the conversation and decision, the amount of time it takes to create software, the quality of that software, and people's abilities to create that software, that is changing. And AI is making that more accessible and easier and lower cost and faster for everyone. And that is fundamentally true. However, you do have to consider that part of the equation is only a small part of the decision rubric that you go through around whether you want to buy versus build. There is naturally going to be more cost in a build today, and that's just a reality. And let me explain that. So one is even with agentic tools and agentic engineering, and that's what we focus on as a company. We help other companies adopt these similar engineering practices. The reality is that you still need to have in your consideration the time it takes to build, although compressed, it's not zero. You need to have expertise in-house that knows how to actually build software, right? So although you can use these tools today, and someone with very little experience can create something that is functional, right? That is very true. To go from something that is just functional to it is, we'll say production or even enterprise ready, it does take a little bit of additional skill and experience to do that correctly. And so the first question is do you have that capability in-house, right? Do you have the people? Do you have the capacity and the focus to get that done? And are you ready to maintain the software? So that's a big part of the conversation, which is custom software. You are the person, your organization owns the maintenance of that software. So every time there's a security patch, a CVE comes out, you're using AI in your new applications. Let's say there's a new model and you want to go leverage those new capabilities. You are going to be the one that has to change that software, test that software, release it, and be responsible for the ongoing operations. That is definitely not a zero cost. But the reality is that there is still the probability that you are building new software. New software, no matter how many tests that you create, because we know our agents love to create tens of thousands of unit tests and tell you it's all green. But the reality is that with brand new software, when you launch into production and you run real production data through it, that's where the world's messy and you find bugs, right? And there's issues. And the question then becomes, do you want to be the person on the, we'll say the front line, the bleeding edge that's going to be going down this path of custom software and finding these bugs for the first time yourself and resolving it? Or do you want to go with a platform that's been battle tested, the water's been through the pipes many times, we know it's stable because of the audience and the number of customers they have? That's a big part of the equation. You have to think about that. I also advise customers to think about the strategy of when to invest or not invest. Is the thing that you're building, is this core and critical to your business? Is this a differentiator or is this commodity? And if it's commodity, then you have to ask the question again, a question of capacity and focus. It's not even a question of capability. It's, do I want to focus time and energy at all on something that's a commodity that I can purchase at a reasonable price versus going down and building it custom? So, and I think every scenario is different. I would say also when you're taking consideration cost, the cost is beyond just the maintenance and the build of the software. You have to think about particularly like the economics of SaaS. When you're buying a SaaS product and you're buying a subscription, you're buying a seat, right? And I call it like you're buying a seat on the bus, right? And that seat on the bus is a particular cost, and it's almost always cheaper than building and buying the whole bus. And so when you're going down the custom path and you're a tenant of one and you're a customer of one, you're buying that whole bus. And so you have to then weigh that. Like, does it make sense? Do I want to spend that amount of money on that amount of engineering, or can I come up with a commodity solution that's a SaaS product that's just a license that I pay for every month? So I think these are all questions that come into play. And I think although the pendulum has swung and again the rubric has changed and the way we think about it is fundamentally changed, there's still just some underlying principles here that haven't. And so certainly there is still a buy moment, and there is definitely a decision that has to be made on a scenario by scenario basis.
Thank you, Tom, for clarifying that so well. So to talk a little bit more about the build part of it. Now, let's say an organization decides to go ahead and build their own software and their own solution for a particular business need that they have. Now, what are the additional steps that they need from a governance or from a guardrail standpoint to ensure that this internal app that they're building still meets with the security, safety, and maintainability aspect of the software, right? So that's a critical piece that's kind of would be missing if they're thinking, oh yes, I can vibe code my way into getting this whole application ready in no time, right? So what are the key things that, in your opinion, they need to take care of?
Yeah, that's another great question. And it's great because the reality is that the same governance and controls that you would want to have in your agentic engineering is the same governance and controls that you should have right now if you're building custom software, right? So let's not, put ourselves in a situation that just because I'm using a new tool and I'm using an AI that allows me to generate code faster and a greater scale, the fundamentals of building good software and operating good software have changed. Right? You still need to have those fundamentals. So then the question is, well, like, what do you do to empower your organization so that people can build and make, and you want to drive accelerate innovation? So a couple things. One is first, you probably get your arms around who's making what and why and how, right? So that conversation of like onboarding them into your engineering extended organization and understanding what they're building for what purpose, and then looking across your landscape to understand, okay, do I have different business groups that are building basically the same thing? Does this make sense? Asking questions of them, going, great, you thought about this. What's the long-term need? Is this a short-term tool that you're building for, next week because you're demoing something, or no, you're going to run this part of the business for the next 6 months or 6 years, right? Those type of questions are important because the level of engineering and support that goes into it is going to change. Second is you need to think about how do you safely deploy this software. That's where in our observation, folks that have a little bit less experience with building and deploying software can really stumble, right? So thinking about, how do I provision the appropriate, typically cloud infrastructure to do deployments? Think about that and how can you build guardrails in an environment so that there's a safe space sandbox. And there's different providers that do this. There's even like cloud providers that try to create these safe spaces. But you want to create an organization, a controlled space that you know that if something gets pushed out, and let's say it doesn't have all the appropriate authentication controls day one, and it actually gets pushed, that the blast radius is contained, right? You're in an environment that hopefully you can control that risk. So I think that's important. So thinking through the deployment. The other thing that you can do too is, the powerful thing that we see with agentic engineering is when you make the investment in, really kind of thinking through for most of these platforms, agent definitions, skills and hooks, and using the underlying platform to bake into it both deterministic and non-deterministic quality controls, you get a higher quality output. So what you could consider doing is your engineering team, they could focus on, well, how do we think about, how will we define, let's say, like a security sentinel agent that could help someone start to identify security problems as they're building it? Or maybe, it's the infrastructure agent, or perhaps it's an architect agent that thinks about system design. Those are types of things that your skilled engineers could do to then basically digitize their experience and give it to people that don't necessarily come from that background. So those are just some examples, and you do have to think about these things because the reality is although it's very empowering to use this technology, the speed at which the technology runs is mind blowing, and we call it the blast radius is huge. Like you can generate a tremendous amount of functionality and code in a very short period of time, and you can, in some cases, get yourself in a lot of hot water, right? If you don't do that correctly. So it is a risk, right? You do need to think about as we'll say the role definitions in the organization are changing, right? The traditional you are the end user. We have a product manager that comes in and talks to you, and then the product manager talks to like an engineer, and then the engineers go and build. That's sort of morphing and changing, right? And it's going in both directions. And so now the question is, do you have the appropriate tools and controls and guardrails in place to do that effectively and safely, while not stifling, innovation, right? You want to be able to allow people to move at the speed that they want to move.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom, for outlining that really well. So, to summarize, what I'd like to say is in the buy versus build debate, it's not really about choosing a side, but it's about deciding which side to choose when.
Yes.
So thank you for clarifying and bringing a lot of these perspectives and these parameters so that organizations, when they go ahead and choose, they get clear clarity on, okay, if I'm going to build, what are the things I need to take care of? Or if I'm going to buy, what is going to be the outcome of that? Or what's the maintainability? What do I need to really worry about? So thank you so much for sharing these thoughts with us. So happy to have you here on the show and wishing you all the best with NexEra.
You're very welcome, and thank you for having us. We look forward to the next one.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.